At 39, I had $47 in my pocket, a son sleeping in the passenger seat, and a key to a cabin that hadn't been opened since 1965. The key was heavier than it should have been. That's the first thing I noticed about it, when the lawyer dropped it into my palm. It was iron, dark with age, shaped like something from an old photograph. It felt like it had been sitting at the bottom of a drawer for so long that it had forgotten what doors were for. Mrs. Colton, the lawyer had said, pushing a single sheet of paper across his desk. There are 3 conditions. You can't sell the property. You have to go inside. And you have to go alone the first time. I remember laughing, not because any of it was funny, but because that was the only sound I had left that didn't feel like crying. Alone, I repeated. That's what the will says. I have a 9-year-old. The lawyer folded his hands. He had kind eyes, the kind that had probably seen a lot of people sit in that chair and try not to fall apart. The condition is that he waits in the vehicle while you cross the threshold the first time. After that, it's your house. You do as you please. I sat there for a long moment, looking at the key, at the paper, at the folder with my name typed across the top in letters that looked too official for a woman who had been washing her hair in gas station sinks for 11 months. Who was he? I finally asked. The man who left me this. The lawyer's face softened in a way that felt practiced, like he had been waiting for that question since I walked in. His name was Elias Harrow, he said, and I think, Mrs. Colton, he was waiting for you for a very long time. The road to Harrow's Bend was a back road off a back road, the kind the GPS stops recognizing about 3 turns in. My son Noah pressed his face against the window and watched the trees close and around the car like a tunnel made of pine in late afternoon shadow. Mom, he said, not taking his eyes off the glass, how come the trees look bigger up here? Because nobody's cut them in a long time, baby. Why? I didn't answer because I didn't have one. I'd spent the last 1,200 miles not having answers. I didn't have an answer for why my husband, Ray, had walked out the day after Noah's 8th birthday. I didn't have an answer for why the bank took the house, even though I'd begged for 3 extra months. I didn't have an answer for why the women's shelter in Denver had been full every single night for 9 nights in a row, and why, on the 10th night, I'd stopped trying. I had become very good at not having answers. I had become very good at driving. The car coughed as the gravel steepened. It was an '04 sedan with a cracked windshield and a heater that only worked if you hit the dashboard in a specific spot above the glove compartment. Noah had learned, somewhere around Kansas, to reach up and do it without being asked. There, he said suddenly, pointing. Mom, is that it? I slowed, through a gap in the pines. I saw it. A wooden cabin set back from the road in a clearing full of long brown grass, the kind of grass that had grown up and laid down and grown up again for 60 uninterrupted springs. The roof sagged in the middle of the way an old horse's back sags. One of the front windows was boarded from the inside. The porch had a step missing. It didn't look abandoned. It looked shut. There's a difference. Abandoned houses let the weather in. Shut houses don't. I pulled the car onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden silence was enormous. Noah, I said, turning in my seat, I need you to stay right here for a few minutes, okay? His eyes went wide. By myself, I'll be in that cabin right there. You can see me the whole time. The lawyer said I had to go in alone the first time. That's the rule. Who makes a rule like that? A man who died a long time before we got here. Noah thought about that. He had his father's habit of chewing his bottom lip when something worried him, and it was the only thing Ray had ever given him that I actually wanted him to keep, because it made him look like he was thinking, and a boy who thinks will always find his way home. Okay, he said finally, but leave the door open. The car door, the cabin door, so I can see you're still in there. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you a favor. If this story finds you tonight, wherever you're listening from, whatever kitchen or car or quiet room you're in, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are. I like imagining the people who find these stories in the dark hours. It makes the world feel smaller in a good way. I stepped out of the car. The mountain air hit me like cold water. It smelled like pine needles and wet bark and something else, something mineral, the way a basement smells when it hasn't been open in a while, except this was outside under open sky. I walked toward the cabin with the key in my fist. Up close, the door was worse than I'd expected. The wood was the color of old coffee grounds and cross-hatched with weather scars. The handle was pitted iron. Above the door, carved into the lintel in letters, so faded they were almost gone, were 2 words: "Hold fast." I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if it was instructions or a prayer. The lock fought me. The key slid in, but it wouldn't turn. I had to lean my shoulder against the door and work the key back and forth. And for a second, I thought it was going to snap off in the mechanism. And I thought, of course this is how it ends. I drove 1,400 miles for a key that breaks. Then it gave. It didn't click. It groaned. Somewhere deep in the wood, the door swung inward half an inch and then stopped, like it had forgotten how to open the rest of the way. I pushed. The air that came out was cold. Not cool. Cold, like it had been stored. 60 years of sealed-up air rolling past my face. And I swear to you it smelled like someone else's life. Dust hung in the shaft of afternoon light that followed me in. I could see everything the way you see things in a photograph, all at once, without your eyes having time to sort them. A wooden table set for 2, with plates still on it. A coat on a hook. A pair of boots by the door, size for a man. A rocking chair angled toward the fireplace, as if someone had just stood up from it. A kettle on the stove. It wasn't abandoned. It was interrupted. 60 years ago, someone had been living in this cabin. And then one day, without warning and without packing, they had stopped. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to my own breath. Outside, I could hear Noah in the car, fiddling with the radio that didn't work. Inside, the cabin was so quiet it had a shape to it. On the table, beside one of the 2 plates, there was an envelope. It wasn't yellowed. It wasn't dusty. It was a plain white envelope, the kind you buy in a packet of 50 at a drugstore, placed squarely in the middle of the table, as if someone had set it down an hour ago. Written across the front, in a careful hand, was a single word: Hannah. That's my name. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Not even the lawyer knew the exact day. He just handed me the key and said, "Whenever you're ready." I sat down in the nearest chair because my knees didn't feel like holding me up anymore. I stared at that envelope the way you stare at something in a dream when you realize the dream is about you. Then I reached out and picked it up. Before I opened that envelope, I want you to understand where I came from, because the next 20 minutes of my life are going to sound like a fairy tale. And fairy tales land differently when you know what the ground looked like before the story started. I grew up 2 states away, in a river town that never got famous for anything except a flood in 1983 that my mother survived and never quite recovered from. My father worked at a grain elevator until his lungs gave out at 56. My mother cleaned motel rooms until her back did. I was the middle of 3 daughters. The oldest, Rhiannon, was the pretty one. The youngest, Claire, was the smart one. I was the one who stayed. I stayed through Rhiannon's wedding, which my mother paid for with a second mortgage. I stayed through Claire's college, which my father paid for by selling his truck and walking to work until the day he died. I stayed through my mother's bad years, when she'd sit in the kitchen with the lights off and tell me, in a voice flat as a griddle, that I was the one she could rely on, and therefore the one who could wait. I waited a long time. Too long, probably. By the time I met Ray Colton at a church potluck when I was 29, I had already decided that waiting was a kind of life, and that a plain life with a plain man was probably the most I was going to get. Ray was handsome the way small-town men are handsome. Big shoulders, a good laugh, a way of opening doors that felt like manners and turned out to be performance. He told me on our 3rd date that he wanted 4 kids and a house with a porch. I believed him. I believed him all the way through the wedding and the first apartment and the pregnancy that gave us Noah and the 5 years after Noah, when Ray kept saying next year about the house and next year about the other kids and next year about everything. The layoff at the feed plant came when Noah was 6. Ray couldn't find work. Or he wouldn't. I stopped being able to tell the difference. The drinking started small and got bigger. The temper started small and got bigger. The day Ray left, the day after Noah's 8th birthday, he took the joint checking account and the good car and the title to the trailer we were renting to own, and he left me with a sedan, a 9-year-old boy, and a note that said, "I'm not built for this." My mother had died 2 years before that. My father a long time before her. Rhiannon had moved to Phoenix and stopped answering my calls sometime during the bad year. Claire, the smart one, sent a text that said, "I'm so sorry, Hannah, but we're just barely keeping our own heads above water." I didn't ask again. The 11 months after Ray left are a blur I don't remember in order. I remember losing the trailer. I remember the first shelter and the second shelter in the church basement in Salina, where a woman named Marlene gave Noah a juice box and didn't ask any questions. I remember the night I sat in the sedan in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store and counted my money 3 times, hoping it would come out to more than $23.17. And it didn't. It didn't. I remember the phone call from a number I didn't recognize. A Montana area code. "Mrs. Colton? My name is Porter Ainsley. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Elias Harrow. Mr. Harrow passed away 11 months ago, and he has left you a piece of property." I remember saying, "I don't know any Elias Harrow," and I remember the pause on the other end. The kind of pause lawyers make when they're deciding how much to tell you. "Mrs. Colton," he said, "I think he knew you." The envelope opened easily. The glue inside had long since given up. The paper it held was thick, good paper, the kind people used to write on when they meant what they were writing. The handwriting was the same careful hand that had written my name on the front. "Hannah, if you are reading this, then the lock has finally turned, and I owe you more truth than one letter can hold. But a letter is where it has to start. My name is Elias Harrow. Was, by the time you read this, an old man who lived quietly in a cabin on the edge of a mountain for most of his life. I closed the doors of this house in October of 1965. I never opened them again. I lived the rest of my years in a smaller place down the ridge, where I could watch the road. I closed this cabin because something happened here that I could not set right, and I decided that the house had earned the right to keep its own silence until someone arrived who could bear what it held. That someone is you. You will not know me. There is no reason you should. But I knew your grandfather, and I knew your grandmother, and before I am done writing this, you will know them both better than your mother ever let you." I put the letter down. My mother had never, in my entire life, spoken about her parents. Not once. I had grown up assuming they were dead before I was born, and that the grief was the reason for her silence. When I was 12, I asked once, carefully at the kitchen table, whether I had any grandparents I hadn't met. My mother had stood up and walked out of the room, and my father had looked at me and said, very gently, "Don't ask your mother that again, honey." I never did. I picked the letter back up. Your grandmother's name was Ada Harrow. She was my sister. I read that sentence 3 times before it went anywhere. She married a man named Thomas Creel in the spring of 1961. I did not approve of the marriage, and I was not quiet about my disapproval, which is a regret I have carried for 60 years. Thomas was not a good man. He had a way about him that fooled most people in the valley, but he did not fool me, and I told Ada so, and Ada, who was stubborn the way our mother had been stubborn, married him anyway and cut me out of her life for saying what I said. They had one daughter, your mother. Her name, when she was born, was Miriam Creel. My mother's name was Miriam. She had always said, when anyone asked, that Creel was a family name on her mother's side that she kept because her father hadn't wanted it passed down. I had grown up believing Creel was a tender thing, a way of holding on to someone she'd loved. I kept reading. In October 1965, something happened in this valley that I have not spoken of to any living person since. Thomas Creel died. Your mother was 3 years old. Ada was 24. The county wrote it down as an accident, and the county was wrong. And the reason the county was wrong is in this house, under the floor of the bedroom at the end of the hall, in a tin box that I put there myself with my own hands the morning after it happened. I did not go to the authorities. I made a choice, Hannah, and it was not a clean choice, and I have spent 60 years asking whether it was the right one. Ada took your mother and left this valley 2 weeks after Thomas died. She would not speak to me before she went. She did not tell me where she was going. I did not find her again for 41 years, and by then it was too late for anything except a grave I visited once and never told anyone about. Your mother never knew I existed. I know this because I want to find her, 2, when I was old enough to be sure I could not hurt her by being there. She would not see me. She said, through a screen door, that the name Harrow meant nothing to her and that she had a family, and I was not part of it. She did tell me, before she closed the door, that she had 3 daughters. She told me your names. She told me that you, Hannah, were the one who stayed. I have watched you from a great distance for most of your adult life. I did not interfere. It is not my place to interfere with a woman's life on the basis of blood she does not know she carries. But I set this house aside for you, and I set the truth aside for you, and I set one other thing aside for you, which you will understand when you find the tin box. The conditions of the will are not cruelty. They are care. I wanted you to cross the threshold before you knew what was waiting, because I wanted you to choose this place before the place chose you. A gift given under the weight of a secret is not a gift. Now you know enough. The rest is in the floor. Your great-uncle, Elias Harrow. I sat in that chair for a long time. The light through the open door shifted across the floorboards. I could hear Noah in the car, humming something tuneless. My grandmother had a name, Ada. My grandfather had a name, too, and he had died in the cabin I was now sitting in, and the man who'd written me this letter had chosen not to tell anyone how. For the first time in 11 months, I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about where we were going to sleep. I was thinking about my mother at 3 years old being carried out of this valley by a woman who never let her speak her own father's name. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I walked to the front door. Noah, I called. Come on in, baby. Bring your jacket. Noah crossed the threshold the way children cross into deep water, one foot and then the other, testing. He stood just inside the door and turned in a slow circle, taking it in. Mom. Yeah. There's a plate still on the table. I know. Like someone was going to eat. I know, baby. He looked up at me. Are we going to live here? I knelt down so I was his height. His cheeks were red from the cold in the car. His jacket sleeves were too short again. I could see his wrists. Yes, I said. I think we are. He thought about this. Then he said, okay. That was all. Okay. 9 years old. And he'd been through enough by then that the word okay had become a complete sentence for him. Some nights I thanked God for it. Some nights I grieved. I brought our 2 bags in from the car. We had, between us, for changes of clothes, a toothbrush each, a stuffed rabbit Noah had slept with since he was 3, and a photograph of my mother at my high school graduation that I had kept in the glove compartment because it was the last one I hadn't sold. I set everything on the wooden table beside the plate that hadn't moved in 60 years, and the cabin had people in it again for the first time since 1965. We spent the first afternoon not going down the hallway. I don't know how to explain this except to say that I wasn't ready. Elias Harrow had waited 60 years. The tin box had waited 60 years. It could wait another day. I needed to stand in the front room of my grandmother's brother's house and get used to the idea that I had a grandmother's brother at all. So Noah and I swept. We opened the windows, the ones that opened. We found a broom that worked and a broom that didn't. We discovered that the water pump in the kitchen still drew, after a lot of coaxing, though it came up brown for the first 15 minutes. We found a wood stove in the kitchen in better shape than the sedan's engine, and a stack of seasoned pine by the back door that had been split by hands that were long dead. Noah found a wooden box in the pantry with tea in it, real tea, loose leaves in a tin, dried out but still fragrant. Mom, he said, holding it up, can we drink 60-year-old tea? I don't know. Maybe. He considered this seriously. It smells like Christmas. I boiled the pump water twice, and we drank 60-year-old tea out of 2 mugs we found in a cupboard, sitting at a table with a plate on it that we both agreed. Without discussing it, we weren't going to move yet. Outside, the light went bronze and then blue and then gone. I lit the lantern the lawyer had left in a crate on the porch for me. Noah fell asleep in the rocking chair with his rabbit on his chest, which meant the rocking chair was his now and not a stranger's, which was how the cabin began to become ours. I sat up a long time after he was asleep. I watched his chest rise and fall in the lantern light. I thought about my mother, who I had loved and not liked, and whose silences I had inherited like a piece of furniture I didn't know how to use. Ada, I said it out loud once, quietly, to see how it sat in the room. The cabin didn't answer, but it didn't feel empty either. It felt the way a church feels 10 minutes after the last person has left. I went down the hallway the next morning. Noah was still asleep in the rocking chair. I moved as quietly as I could. The hallway was narrower than I remember from the day before, and the boards complained under my weight in a way that felt almost conversational, like the house was saying, "All right, then, if you insist." There were 3 doors, one on the left, one on the right, and one at the end. The first 2 were bedrooms. The one on the left was small, a single bed, a child's bed, made up with a faded quilt that had a pattern of rabbits around the border. There was a low shelf with 3 books on it. Heidi, the Velveteen Rabbit, a book of nursery rhymes. The books were worn the way books get worn when a small person has been read the same pages many nights in a row. My mother had slept in that bed. I knew it without having to check. I stood in the doorway a long time. Then I closed the door gently and moved on. The second bedroom was bigger. A double bed neatly made. A pair of women's shoes under the bed, flat-heeled, practical. A hairbrush on the dresser with dark hair, still caught in the bristles. A photograph in a frame on the bedside table. I picked up the photograph. 2 people on the porch of this cabin. A woman with dark hair pulled back. A baby on her hip. A man standing slightly apart from her, not touching her, not smiling. The baby was laughing at something past the camera. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mother. The man had a face I had never seen before. And yet I knew, looking at it, that my mother had spent her whole life not looking like him on purpose. Everything she had softened in herself, he had kept sharp. Everything she had made quiet, he had let run loud. I put the photograph down. I closed that door, too. The third door was at the end of the hall. The one Elias had written about. It was a master bedroom, I guess, except it had a plainness about it that made master feel like the wrong word. Iron bed frame, a chest of drawers, a wardrobe with one door hanging slightly open, a braided rug on the floor. The colors faded to a soft sameness. I knelt on the rug. I rolled it back. The floorboards underneath looked like any other floorboards at first. Pine planks, dark with age, nailed down in the pattern they'd been nailed down in 60 years ago. But as I ran my hand across them, I felt the seam. A square, cut cleanly into the floor and fitted back in so precisely that if you didn't know to look, you'd never see it. I found a lifting edge with my thumbnail. The square came up in my hand. Underneath was a shallow space, no deeper than a shoebox, and inside the space was a tin box, just as Elias had written. It was a kind of tin that tea or biscuits used to come in. Painted blue once, now scuffed almost white at the corners. I lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. I sat on the braided rug with the tin in my lap, and for the second time in 2 days, I thought about how I was about to learn something I could not unlearn. If this story is reaching you, if any part of it is sitting in your chest right now, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you don't miss the rest of what happened. There are people in this story who waited 60 years to have the truth told about them. The least we can do is not look away. The tin held 4 things. A bundle of letters tied with brown string. A small black notebook, the kind a man carries in his shirt pocket. A folded document, official, with a county seal stamped on the outside. And a small cloth pouch, which, when I loosened the drawstring, held a wedding ring, a simple gold band, and a child's silver bracelet with the name Miriam engraved on the inside. I set the ring and the bracelet on the rug beside me. I couldn't look at them yet. I picked up the notebook first. It was Elias Harrow's hand, the same hand from the letter. The first entry was dated April 14th, 1962. Ada came home today with the child. Thomas was not with her. She would not say why. She stayed 4 hours and then went back to him. The child is sturdy. She looks at everything the way Ada looked at everything when she was small. I gave her a piece of maple sugar, and she laughed. The entries were short. A paragraph, sometimes 2. They skip weeks and sometimes months. But a pattern emerged as I read. June 1962. Ada came with a bruise on her forearm. She said it was from a kitchen accident. I did not press her. I should have pressed her. November 1962. The child was sick. Ada walked her up the ridge because the truck would not start and Thomas was away. I kept them 2 nights. Thomas came for them on the 3rd morning and was angry. March 1963. I spoke to Ada outside the church. She would not look at me. She said, "Elias, you do not understand what it is to have chosen." I said I did. I did not. I understand now. August 1964. The child is 2. She called me uncle today for the first time. Ada corrected her. She said she is not to use that word. I did not ask why. February 1965. Ada came alone. She asked me if anything ever happened, would I keep the child? I said yes. She left. I did not see her again until October. I closed my eyes. October 9th, 1965. Thomas came to this cabin today, drunk, at 3 in the afternoon. He said Ada had taken the child and run, and he thought I was hiding them. I said I was not. He did not believe me. He had a pistol. He pointed it at me. I took it from him. In the taking, it discharged. He died on the floor of my front room before I could stand up from where I had been knocked. I sat with him for an hour. I did not know what to do. Then I went down the ridge to find Ada. She was at the boarding house in town with the child. I told her what had happened. I told her I would go to the sheriff. She said no. She said if I went to the sheriff, they would take the child from her because she was the wife of a dead man and the sister of the man who had killed him. She said she would not lose her daughter over Thomas Creel. She told me what to do. I did it. I buried him on the far side of the ridge where the creek bends. I took his truck and drove it into the lake at the quarry and left it there. I burned the floorboards where he fell and laid new ones. I cleaned the cabin, and I closed the cabin, and I did not open it again. The county wrote it down, 2 months later, that Thomas Creel had abandoned his wife and child and left the state. No one looked for him. No one in this valley wanted him found. Ada took the child and left. She would not let me come with her. She would not let me write. She said, "Elias, you did this for me, but I cannot look at you. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry." Then she was gone. I have lived 60 years with Thomas Creel on the far side of that ridge and with my sister's face on the other side of a door. She would not open, and with a niece who grew up not knowing my name, and a great-niece, I have watched from a great distance because I promised Ada I would not interfere. And I kept the promise because it was the only thing of hers I had left to keep. This book is for Hannah, who will be the only person I ever tell. I set the notebook down very carefully on the rug. My grandmother had made a choice at 24 years old in a kitchen with a 3-year-old daughter and a dead husband on the floor, and the choice had cost her brother, and the choice had cost my mother a family, and the choice had cost me, 60 years later, every single thing I had ever thought I understood about where I came from, and it had saved all 3 of them. Because I could see it now, reading it, I could see what would have happened if Elias had gone to the sheriff. In 1965, in a county like that, a woman whose husband was dead in her brother's house would have been looked at sideways for the rest of her life, and a child would have grown up inside that sideways look. Ada had chosen to carry the weight herself. She had chosen to carry it out of that valley and into a life so silent that her own granddaughter had believed, for 39 years, that there was nothing to know. I understood my mother then. I understood her for the first time. Her flatness, her silences, the way she had sat in the dark kitchen after the flood and told me I was the one she could rely on. She had been raised by a woman carrying a body she couldn't put down, and she had learned from watching that love was something you bore alone because bringing anyone else into it would crush them. I was not going to be crushed. I opened the folded document last. It was a deed, not to the cabin. I already had that. It was to the land. All of it. 231 acres on the ridge. Legally described, signed and notarized in 1967, in Ada Harrow's own hand, and transferred by her, not to her daughter, not to herself, but into a trust, with single-name beneficiaries 60 years in the future. Hannah Ruth Creel, upon her attainment of the age of majority, or upon her becoming the parent of a minor child, whichever condition shall last occur, and upon her crossing the threshold of the dwelling known as Harrow's Bend. My grandmother had put this land in my name when I was not yet born. She had made my uncle the steward of it, and she had made him promise not to tell, and she had died somewhere I would never know about without ever letting me look her in the face. And she had done all of this because one October afternoon in 1965, she had chosen her daughter's life over her own, and she had spent the rest of her years making sure her granddaughter would have a place to land if the world ever did to her what the world had done to her. The world had done it, and I had landed. I sat on the braided rug with the letters still tied in their string, and the ring in my left hand, and the bracelet in my right, and I cried the way I had not let myself cry in 11 months. I cried the way I had not let myself cry since Ray walked out. I cried for my mother, who had never been told, and for my grandmother, who had never told her, and for my great-uncle, who had lived alone on a ridge for 60 years, keeping a door shut, so that a woman he had never met could one day open it and understand that she was not, had never been, alone. Noah found me there. I didn't hear him come down the hall. He just appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up on one side. "Mom," he said quiet, "why are you on the floor?" I opened my arms. He came and sat in them, the way he used to when he was 4. "I found something about our family," I said into his hair. "Something good." I thought about how to answer that. "Something true," I said. He was quiet for a while. "Is true better than good?" he asked. "Sometimes, baby. Sometimes it is." 2 days later, I drove into town and found the lawyer's office again. Porter Ainsley had a small practice on the second floor of a brick building that had probably been a bank once. He looked up when I came in, and I could see, in the way he stood up, that he'd been expecting me. "Mrs. Colton." "Hannah." "Hannah, then. Sit down, please." I sat. I put the notebook and the deed and the bundle of letters on his desk. "In that order. I need to ask you 3 things," I said. "All right. First, did you know?" He folded his hands. He chose his words the way a man chooses his footing on a wet rock. "I knew some of it," he said. "I did not know all of it. Elias was my client for 31 years. He told me what I needed to know to execute his estate, and not one word more." "Did you know about my grandmother?" I knew he had a sister who had passed. I did not know her name until I opened the instructions a morning after he died. "Did you know about my grandfather?" "No." I watched his face. He was telling the truth. A man who has spent 3 decades being told exactly what he needs to know does not, in my experience, develop the face of a liar. "Second question," I said. "The land, is it really mine?" "It is really yours." The trust was structured in 1967 by an attorney named Whitley, who was your grandmother's childhood friend. He is long dead. His firm has existed in 3 different forms since then, but the trust has been administered continuously. I took it over from a man named McKinnon in 1994. Your grandmother chose the trust structure specifically because she did not want the land to pass through her own estate or your mother's. She wanted it to skip 2 generations and land in yours. She was very clear about that. "Why?" He hesitated. "I can only tell you what Elias told me." He said Ada believed that the cost of the secret should not fall on the daughter who had been in the room when it happened. He said she wanted the land to reach someone who was far enough in the event that it could be a beginning instead of an ending. I thought about that for a long time. "Third question," I said. "Yes." "Thomas Creel. Is he still on the ridge?" Porter Ainsley's hands did not move. His face did not change. But his eyes settled on me the way a man's eyes settle when he's been waiting for a very long time for someone to ask him a specific question. "Yes," he said, "he is." "What do I do?" "That," he said, "is the only question in this entire matter that is not for me to answer. It is for you. You are the only living person who knows. You are the only living person Elias meant to be the only living person who knew. Whatever you do or don't do, I will help you with it. I will also not push you." I sat with that. 60 years ago, my grandmother had made a choice to protect her child. 60 years ago, my great-uncle had made a choice to protect his sister. The choices had held. The county had not gone looking. The man Thomas Creel had not been missed by anyone who mattered, and the consequences of reversing the decision of handing a sheriff department in 2024 skeleton on a ridge and a 60-year-old confession written in a dead man's notebook would fall not on Thomas, not on Ada, not on Elias, but on me and on Noah and on whatever kind of life we were going to build in the cabin that my grandmother had preserved for me across 6 decades. I did not have to decide that morning. I did not have to decide that year. I said, I'd like to visit the place, the bend in the creek. I can tell you where it is. I'd like to go alone. All right. I went the next day. I left Noah with Walter Briggs's wife, Elaine. Walter was a neighbor who had found us by the second morning, the way rural neighbors do, and who had stood on the porch with his hat in his hand and said, "You must be Hannah. Elias talked about you once," as if the sentence had been waiting in his mouth for a decade. Elaine had taken one look at Noah's sleeves and said, "Come here, child. I have a boy's coat that doesn't fit my grandson anymore," and that was that. I walked the ridge. I found the bend. It was a quiet place. The creek ran low that time of year, and the rocks were the color of old iron. There was no marker. There didn't need to be. Elias had known where he was, and now I knew. I stood there for a long time. I didn't pray exactly. I don't know what I did. Before I left, I said out loud, "I don't know yet what I'm going to do about you, but I wanted you to know that someone knows. Someone besides him. That's all I can promise today." The creek kept running. That was the only answer I got, and it was enough. We stayed. I want you to understand that there was a moment, about 3 weeks in, when I sat at the table in the front room with a stack of bills I had driven into town to pay at the post office, and I did the math that my grandmother had done 60 years before me. I could sell the land, not the cabin. The will was firm on that, but the 231 acres were mine to do with as I liked, and there were logging companies and developers who would have paid me enough money, in one morning, to put Noah through college and set us up in a ranch house in a town with a grocery store and a school and a library, and I would never, not for the rest of my life, have to worry about a shelter being full again. I thought about it seriously. I owe you that honesty. I thought about it for 4 days. Then I walked the ridge. I walked the bend in the creek, and I walked past it, up to the crest, where on a clear day you could see 3 valleys stitched together by the thin silver thread of a river. I stood up there, and I thought about my grandmother carrying her 3-year-old down this ridge in October of 1965. I thought about what she had chosen and what she had lost. I thought about her putting this land into a trust 2 years after she left, when she must still have been shaking from what she'd seen, when she must have had to decide, in the middle of her own grief, to plant a tree whose shade she would never sit in. She had planted it for me. You don't sell a tree like that. Not the first week you sit under it. I went home. I told Noah we were staying. He said, "Okay," and then, after a minute, he said, "Mom, does stay mean we get a dog?" We got a dog. Eventually, a gray mutt with one ear that wouldn't stand up. Noah named him Elias, which I had to sit with for a while. But Noah was right, and the dog was right, and by the end of the first year, the name had settled into the cabin the way a cat settles into a sunbeam, like it had always meant to be there. The first winter was hard. I won't pretend it wasn't. Walter taught me to split wood, and Elaine taught me to can. A woman named Dolores at the post office taught me, without seeming to teach me, that a small town will absorb a stranger at exactly the speed the stranger absorbs it, no faster, no slower. By February, people had stopped looking at me when I walked into the diner. By April, they had started saving me a seat. I used them the coins from the tin. There were more than I've told you about yet. Elias had been saving for a long time to fix the roof and replace the boards on the porch and buy a used truck that ran better than the sedan had ever run. I did not fix the cabin up beyond what it needed. It had held its own shape for 60 years. It did not want to become something else. I respected that. The second spring, a woman showed up at the end of the gravel road with a black eye and a little girl about Noah's age in the passenger seat of a Buick with Oregon plates. I knew her face before I knew her name. Not because I knew her, but because I had been her, in a parking lot in Salina, 11 months into the worst year of my life. I walked down to the Buick. I leaned on the window. I said, "I don't have a lot, but I have a room, and I have time. Come on up to the house." Her name was Priya. She stayed 7 weeks. Her daughter Zara taught Noah how to braid a rope, and Noah taught Zara how to call for the dog. And when Priya left, she left for a place she had found because she had been given 7 weeks in a cabin to find it, which was 7 weeks longer than anyone had given me. After Priya, there was a woman named June. After June, a woman named Marta and her 2 boys. I did not advertise. I did not make a sign. Word traveled the way word travels in places that still have porches. The upstairs bedroom, my grandmother's room, the one with the photograph, became a room that women stayed in, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for a season, and left from, always, in a direction that was forward instead of sideways. I never told any of them the whole story of the cabin. I told them enough. I told them it had been closed for a long time and that I had opened it and that it had turned out to hold more than I had expected, and that the more it held had made me believe, in a way I hadn't before, that sometimes the people who came before us had done hard and complicated things, so that the people coming after us would have a door to walk through. I want to tell you what I did about Thomas Creel. I thought about it for 3 years. I talked to Porter Ainsley twice more. I read Elias's notebook 6 or 7 times, looking for something I might have missed. I walked the bend in the creek, at least once every season. In the end, I did nothing. I did not call the sheriff. I did not have the ground dug up. I did not undo what my grandmother had asked my great-uncle to do, because my grandmother had asked it, and my great-uncle had done it, and the two of them had lived with it, and I came to believe, slowly, that the ground had also agreed to hold it. I did do one thing. On the 5th anniversary of the day Noah and I crossed the threshold, I walked up to the bend in the creek, with small flat stone I had carried up from the lower field, and I set it down at the base of the cedar where Elias, I was fairly sure, had done his work. I did not carve anything into the stone. I did not say a name. I said quietly, so that only the creek could hear, "This is as much as I can give you. It is more than you gave them. I hope it is enough." Then I walked home. Noah is 15 now. He's taller than me by 3 inches, and he has my mother's eyes, which I did not expect and which I am grateful for. He works in the woods with Walter's grandson on Saturdays, and he reads at night, and he has the same habit his father had of chewing his bottom lip when he thinks, and I am still grateful for it. Last summer, sitting on the porch with me after dinner, he said, "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if the lawyer hadn't called?" I thought about it. Sometimes. I said, "Not as often as I used to." "Where do you think we'd be?" "I don't know, baby. Somewhere." He was quiet. The dog was asleep at his feet. The sun was doing the long, slow thing it does in the mountains, the thing I still haven't gotten used to. "Mom," he said, "you know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "I think about how we almost didn't come up that road. We almost didn't. But we did. We did." He looked out at the clearing. "I'm glad we did." "Me too, baby." The sun slid the rest away behind the ridge. The cabin at our backs was warm and lit, and full of supper smell and dog hair, and the slightly off-tune hum of a used refrigerator I bought at an auction in the 3rd year. Inside, on the wall above the fireplace, in a frame I had made myself from what Walter had given me, hung the photograph of my grandmother with my mother on her hip on the same porch in 1963. I had put Thomas out of frame when I cropped it, not to erase him. I don't believe in erasing, but because the picture, to me, was not about him. It was about her arms around a child she was going to carry out of a valley and into a silence that had to last 60 years before a door on the other end of it could open. She had carried. Elias had waited. My mother had survived. And I, the one who stayed, the one who had always been the one who stayed, had finally been given a place worth staying in. The moral, if a story like this has a moral, is this: some inheritances are not money and are not even truth. Some inheritances are the chance, finally, to stop running. Someone who loved you before you were born may have laid a stone down for your foot 60 years in advance, and you may walk over 1,000 times without knowing. And then one day, on a day you thought was your worst day, in a year you thought was your last year, you may find that the stone was there all along, and that what felt at the time like falling was actually your foot finally landing where someone had always meant it to land. The cabin is still here. The door still says hold fast above the lintel. I understand what it means now. It was not instructions, and it was not a prayer. It was a promise my grandmother left for a granddaughter she would never meet. I intend to keep it. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.